Chapter 1. Signs in the Sky. The night it all began, the sky seemed to hold its breath. The stars above New York City shimmered unusually bright, as though competing with the artificial glow of the towering skyline. The air was heavy, tinged with a humidity that heralded summer storms. On the streets below, pedestrians hurried home, unaware that humanity's course was about to shift irrevocably. Dr. Elena Vasquez leaned against the railing of her apartment balcony, her eyes scanning the heavens. She was a celebrated astrophysicist, a rising star in the field of exoplanet research, but tonight she wasn't thinking about work. She was just looking for a moment of peace amid the chaos of her life. The faint hum of distant traffic provided a soundtrack to her musings. Then it happened. A streak of light blazed across the sky, brighter than anything Elena had ever seen. It wasn't a shooting star or a comet, it moved with purpose, slowing as it descended toward the horizon. She froze, the wine glass in her hand slipping through her fingers and shattering on the tiles. "What the?" she whispered, her heart pounding. The object came to a halt high above the earth, hovering motionlessly in the atmosphere. Within moments, dozens of smaller lights appeared, forming a constellation of ships that covered the night like a net. The glow they cast wasn't cold and metallic but organic, pulsating with a rhythm that felt alive. Elena wasn't the only one to notice. All around her, neighbors emerged onto their balconies, their murmurs rising into a collective gasp. News alerts buzzed on phones, and social media feeds exploded with speculation. Her phone rang, jolting her back to reality. She snatched it up. "Elena," said a voice, urgent and clipped. It was her colleague, Dr. Isaac Chen, from the International Space Institute. "Are you seeing this?" "Of course I'm seeing this," she replied, her voice trembling. "What is it? A meteor? A military test?" "I don't think so." Isaac's voice was tinged with awe. "Whatever it is, it's decelerating. Purposefully. Elena, they're here." The secure conference room at the Pentagon was a fortress of steel and concrete, a place where the world's most consequential decisions were made. Tonight, it was filled with an electric tension as generals, intelligence analysts, and scientific advisors pored over live feeds of the objects in orbit. General David Turlock stood at the head of the table, his jaw clenched as he reviewed the latest satellite images. His presence was commanding, a man forged in decades of military service. The room was buzzing with hurried whispers and the hum of machines, but his sharp bark cut through it all. Silence. The room fell still. Turlock turned to an analyst seated in front of a massive screen. "What do we know so far?" The analyst, a young lieutenant named Reyes, swallowed nervously and adjusted his headset. "Sir, as of now, we've confirmed the presence of approximately 60 objects in high Earth orbit. Each one measures between 1 and 3 kilometers in length. Their formation is deliberate, symmetrical. No detectable propulsion systems, but their movements suggest controlled deceleration and stabilization." Turlock frowned. "Energy signatures?" Reyes hesitated. "Off the charts, sir. We're seeing energy readings we can't fully categorize, somewhere between nuclear and something we haven't encountered before. Their power output is orders of magnitude beyond anything we've ever developed." Turlock's frown deepened. "Weapons systems?" "No identifiable armaments, sir," Reyes said quickly. "At least, nothing conventional. They've made no aggressive moves, and there's no indication they're targeting Earth directly." "Yet," Turlock muttered. He turned to Dr. Natalie Brooks, a physicist from NASA. "What's your take, Dr. Brooks? Could these be terrestrial in origin, some kind of covert project from another nation?" Brooks shook her head, her face pale but composed. "Unlikely. The level of engineering we're seeing here isn't just ahead of us, it's centuries, maybe millennia ahead. And even if another nation had this kind of technology, they wouldn't have the infrastructure to launch 60 ships of this scale without us knowing about it." "So, what are you saying?" Turlock demanded. Brooks hesitated, glancing at the others before speaking. "I'm saying, these aren't human, General." The room exploded with murmurs and exclamations. Aliens was a word that had been whispered all evening, but hearing it stated so plainly sent a chill through the room. Enough, Turlock bellowed, slamming his hand on the table. The voices died down. Speculation doesn't help us. I want facts. Reyes, what's the status of our response teams? The lieutenant quickly adjusted his screen. NORAD is on high alert. Strategic Command has activated DEFCON 2. All missile silos and airbases are standing by for orders. Good, Turlock said. And the president? He's been briefed, replied another aide. He's asked us to avoid any provocations while we gather more intelligence. The official directive is restraint. Turlock's expression darkened. Restraint is a luxury we might not have. We need contingencies. Dr. Brooks, if these things decide to attack, what are we looking at? Brooks hesitated again. General, if they wanted to attack, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Their energy output alone could overwhelm our defense systems in seconds. Even if we launched everything we had, it's doubtful we'd scratch their hulls. A tense silence followed her words. Colonel Angela Pratt, a veteran intelligence officer with a reputation for skepticism, broke the silence. We're assuming these things are hostile, but what if they're not? Their positioning is non-aggressive. They've parked in orbit without targeting our satellites or disrupting communications. That doesn't sound like an invasion force to me. Turlock fixed her with a steely gaze. And what does it sound like, Colonel? Pratt folded her arms. An observation mission. Maybe even a diplomatic one. We're reacting like they've already declared war, but for all we know, they might be here to talk. And if you're wrong, Turlock countered. If we sit on our hands and they wipe us out in one strike, how will history remember us? If we attack first and provoke them into wiping us out, how will history remember us then? Pratt shot back. The room grew tense again, the two officers locked in a silent standoff. Reyes cleared his throat hesitantly. Sir, there's something else. Turlock turned to him sharply. Speak up, Lieutenant. It's the message, sir. We've been receiving reports from civilians and military personnel all over the world. They're claiming to have heard something. Heard what? A voice, Reyes said, his voice faltering. It's not coming through traditional radio waves or broadcasts. People are reporting hearing it directly in their heads. It's clear, coherent, and in their native languages. The room collectively stiffened. Turlock's eyes narrowed. You're telling me they're telepathic? Or using a form of technology that simulates it, Brooks interjected. Either way, this isn't something we can counter or even fully comprehend. What's the message? Reyes glanced at his screen. It's simple, we come in peace. We seek harmony and wisdom. Your species is at a turning point, and we're here to help you choose your path. Turlock sank into his chair, his mind racing. The situation was spiraling beyond anything he'd trained for. Aliens, or whatever these beings were, had not only entered Earth's orbit but also directly communicated with the global population. The implications were staggering. General, Pratt said softly, her tone less combative now. They've made the first move, and it wasn't an attack. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. Maybe it's time we listened. Turlock stared at the live feed of the glowing ships. Part of him wanted to agree. But another part, forged in decades of conflict and distrust, screamed that no one gave away power without expecting something in return. Keep me updated, he said finally. And get me the president on the line. We're going to need a hell of a strategy. As the room returned to motion, Turlock leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the alien vessels. Deep down, he knew that whatever strategy they came up with might not matter. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless. The announcement came at precisely 8 p.m. Coordinated Universal Time, though for billions of people, the exact time didn't matter. It happened all at once, across the world, and in a way no one could have predicted or escaped. Elena Vasquez was in her apartment, still glued to her television, which was playing the latest breaking news. The pundits were speculating wildly about the ships, some calling them the end of days, others hailing them as a scientific revolution. She barely noticed the host mid-sentence when the screen flickered, and then Nothing. For a full second, every television, radio, phone, and device on Earth went silent. The absence of sound was eerie, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Then, in an instant, they all came alive with a single message, delivered in a voice unlike anything humanity had ever heard. It wasn't just a voice in the traditional sense. It resonated directly in the minds of every living person. It was clear, calm, and melodic, speaking in each listener's native language. No matter who heard it, the tone was soothing yet commanding, a voice that felt impossible to ignore. "We come in peace." Elena froze. She had no idea how she was hearing the words. The television remained blank, and her phone sat silent on the table. But the voice wasn't just in her ears, it was in her thoughts, as though she were dreaming. "We are the Harbingers. We seek harmony and wisdom. Your species is at a turning point, and we are here to help you choose your path." The words were accompanied by vivid images, more real than any dream. Elena saw shimmering cities rising from verdant landscapes, the structures unlike anything she'd ever imagined. She saw machines repairing ecosystems, oceans teeming with life, and deserts blooming into lush forests. She saw humanity not as it was, but as it could be, thriving, united, limitless. The broadcast lasted only 30 seconds, but its impact was immediate and profound. In crowded streets across Tokyo, people stopped in their tracks, staring wide-eyed at one another, asking, "Did you hear that? Did you see?" In a small village in Ghana, a farmer dropped his tools as the voice filled his mind, whispering promises of a better world. His children ran to him moments later, tears streaming down their faces, shouting, "They spoke to us." In London, traffic ground to a halt as drivers climbed out of their cars, all trying to process the impossible. A woman burst into sobs on the sidewalk, clutching her chest as she said over and over, "It wasn't just me. You heard it too." But not everyone responded with awe. In Moscow, a government official slammed his fists on a desk and shouted orders into a phone. "This is psychological warfare. Get our satellites back online, now." In a rural church in Alabama, a pastor collapsed to his knees, clutching his Bible and crying, "It's the rapture. The rapture is here." In Beijing, the central government's war room descended into chaos as officials debated whether this was an invasion or an opportunity. Within minutes, the world's media exploded. News anchors stammered through live reports, trying to describe what everyone had just experienced. On social media, hashtags like #Harbingers, #FirstContact, and #conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Some claimed the broadcast was a government hoax or an experiment in mass mind control. Others insisted the Harbingers were divine beings, sent to save humanity, or to judge it. Elena stared at her blank television, her hands trembling. She reached for her phone, only to find dozens of texts and missed calls from colleagues, friends, and family. But she couldn't bring herself to respond. Instead, she whispered to herself. They spoke to everyone, at the same time. Her mind raced. How was it possible, even with the most advanced communication networks, transmitting something globally in every language, directly into people's thoughts, was unimaginable. The Harbingers' technology wasn't just advanced, it was godlike. In the hours that followed, governments around the world issued statements. Some called for calm, urging citizens to trust that their leaders would handle the situation. Others took a more defiant stance, condemning the Harbingers as a potential threat. At scientific institutions, teams scrambled to analyze the phenomena. Astrophysicists and linguists debated the mechanics of the broadcast. Neuroscientists speculated on how the Harbingers could have bypassed traditional sensory input to deliver a message directly to the human brain. It's not telepathy in the traditional sense, said one researcher on a late-night news panel. It's a form of communication we can't even begin to categorize, an intersection of technology and biology far beyond our understanding. But one question overshadowed all others. What did the Harbingers mean by a turning point? Elena finally tore herself away from her apartment and made her way to Columbia University, where she knew her colleagues would be gathering. The lab was already buzzing with activity when she arrived. Scientists crowded around monitors, speaking in excited tones. Some were pale and shaken, others alight with curiosity. Isaac Chen spotted her and waved her over. "You heard it, right?" "Of course I heard it," she replied, her voice unsteady. "We all did." He gestured at the screen, which displayed satellite images of the Harbinger ships. "They haven't moved since the broadcast. It's like they're waiting for us to respond." "Respond how?" Elena asked. "What could we possibly say to beings that can do that?" Isaac shook his head. "I don't know, but they've just shown us they're not here to be ignored." Not everyone shared Elena and Isaac's curiosity. Around the world, fear began to take root. Militias in the United States announced plans to protect their communities from alien interference. Religious leaders called for prayer and repentance, warning that the Harbinger's arrival could signal the end times. Stock markets plummeted as investors panicked. In some regions, riots broke out. People smashed electronics, convinced the Harbingers were using technology to control their minds. Others barricaded themselves in their homes, stockpiling food and weapons. Despite their message of peace, the Harbingers had unleashed chaos. And then, nothing. After the broadcast, the Harbingers made no further contact. Their ships remained motionless, glowing softly in the night sky. Days passed, and humanity was left in a vacuum of uncertainty. Some saw the silence as a challenge, others as a test. But for Elena, it was a reminder of just how small humanity truly was in the face of the unknown. As she stared at the sky that night, she felt a mix of awe and dread. For the first time in her life, she wondered whether the answers she'd spent her career seeking might be more terrifying than the questions themselves. Elena Vasquez sat frozen on her worn leather couch, her coffee forgotten and growing cold on the table beside her. The voice, the presence, lingered in her mind like an echo she couldn't shake. It wasn't just the words, it was the feeling. A profound, almost overwhelming calm had washed over her during the broadcast, like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Now, in its absence, a void seemed to yawn inside her, leaving her questioning the very fabric of reality. Her television remained dark, its screen reflecting her wide, disbelieving eyes. Around her, the muted sounds of New York City continued faintly, the distant honk of a car, a child crying in a nearby apartment, someone shouting down the hall. But even these felt unreal. She grabbed her phone, her hands trembling. The lock screen showed 47 missed calls. Her mother, her brother, friends, colleagues, everyone wanted to know if she'd heard it, if she'd seen it, if she had answers. Answers. Elena was a theoretical physicist, specializing in astrophysics and advanced AI modeling at Columbia University. She built her career on seeking answers to humanity's biggest questions, but nothing in her years of study had prepared her for this. Her phone buzzed again, and she answered without thinking. Elena. It was her mother's voice, frantic. "Dios mío, did you hear it? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mama," Elena said automatically, though her voice was shaky. "What does it mean?" her mother pressed. "Are they angels? Demons? What do they want from us?" "I don't know," Elena admitted, her throat tightening. Her mother's faith often clashed with her scientific perspective, but tonight, she couldn't find the will to argue. She didn't have the answers her mother sought, or the ones she needed herself. "I'll call you later, okay?" Before her mother could reply, Elena hung up, guilt twisting in her stomach. She needed to think, needed to breathe. Elena stood and paced her small apartment, running her hands through her dark curls. The images from the broadcast replayed in her mind, the shimmering cities, the oceans teeming with life, the machines repairing a broken planet. It was a vision of paradise, of humanity's potential realized. But was it real, or was it bait? Her scientific mind couldn't help but analyze the situation. The Harbingers, she muttered to herself, the name alien and surreal on her tongue. Advanced technology, mind-to-mind communication, a message of peace, but why? Why now? The timing wasn't lost on her. For years, she and her colleagues had speculated that humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life might coincide with a major technological milestone, such as the advent of artificial general intelligence or sustained interstellar exploration. The Harbingers had all but confirmed it. They had been watching, waiting. And now, with humanity on the cusp of unlocking the secrets of AI and reaching beyond its solar system, they had chosen to reveal themselves. Her thoughts shifted to the darker side of history. She thought of European explorers bringing technology, religion, and conquest to the Americas. To the indigenous peoples, they too had seemed like gods. Elena sank back onto her couch, the weight of the parallels crushing her. What if we're the natives this time? She whispered. She pulled herself out of her spiraling thoughts and stared out the window. The sky above New York was unusually clear, and she could see the faint glimmers of the Harbinger ships in orbit. They weren't stars, too steady, too bright. Despite her fear, she couldn't deny the awe she felt. This was the moment she had dreamed of as a young girl staring at the stars through her father's old telescope. She had always believed humanity wasn't alone, that there was more out there. And now, the proof was hovering above her. She felt a flicker of hope. What if they're telling the truth? She murmured to herself. What if they really are here to help? Her thoughts returned to the images they had shown, the advanced cities, the repaired ecosystems, the promise of harmony. Could humanity truly rise to such heights with the Harbinger's guidance? Or would fear, mistrust, and old wounds sabotage the opportunity? Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her reverie. This time, the name on the screen made her sit up straight. Isaac, she answered. Elena. Isaac Chen's voice was breathless. Thank God. Did you get the broadcast? Of course I did, she replied. I think everyone on the planet did. I'm at the lab, he said. You need to get down here. It's chaos, people are running simulations, debating theories, trying to figure out how the hell they pulled off that broadcast. NASA's already reached out to coordinate. Elena hesitated. I don't know if. No, Isaac interrupted. You need to be here. You've been working on AI modeling for first contact scenarios for years. If anyone can help us understand this, it's you. She closed her eyes, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had spent her life chasing the unknown, and now it had come to her doorstep. She couldn't run from it. I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said. The streets of New York were uncharacteristically quiet as Elena made her way to the university. The usual honking and shouting had given way to an uneasy stillness, as if the city itself was holding its breath. On the subway, people sat in silence, their faces etched with worry and wonder. A man in a business suit clutched a rosary, muttering prayers under his breath. A teenager stared at her phone, scrolling through endless memes, conspiracy theories, and panic posts. Elena found herself studying the faces around her. How many of these people had felt the same mix of awe and terror she had? How many had seen the same visions? When she arrived at Columbia, the campus was buzzing with activity. Crowds had gathered in the quad, watching the news on giant screens. Students and professors debated animatedly, their voices carrying into the night. The lab was a different kind of chaos. Scientists crowded around monitors, analyzing energy signatures and neural patterns, while others scribbled equations on whiteboards. The air crackled with tension and excitement. Elena. Isaac waved her over. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with an almost frantic energy. We're picking up faint signals, residual energy from the broadcast. It's like nothing we've ever seen. Some kind of quantum resonance. She leaned over his monitor, her mind already racing. Are they still transmitting? No, he said. It's like they left fingerprints. We're trying to decode it, but we don't even know what we're looking for. Elena's eyes flicked to the live feed of the Harbinger ships. They hung in orbit, silent and unmoving, their glowing forms a stark contrast to the darkness of space. Maybe they've already told us everything we need to know, she said quietly. Isaac frowned. You think the visions were the message? She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "They're showing us a choice. Now it's up to us to decide what to do with it." From the moment they appeared, the Harbingers' ships defied everything humanity thought it understood about physics, engineering, and design. They materialized in Earth's orbit without warning or detectable propulsion, their arrival marked only by a sudden appearance on every global satellite feed. The ships were enormous, dwarfing even the largest human-made spacecraft. Roughly teardrop-shaped, they gleamed with an otherworldly iridescence that shifted between hues of silver, violet, and deep blue. Their surfaces seemed to ripple subtly, as if alive, reflecting the stars in ways that gave them an almost liquid appearance. At first, astronomers and astrophysicists attempted to measure the dimensions of the ships, but traditional tools proved insufficient. Their size varied depending on the angle and method of observation, with estimates ranging from a few kilometers to nearly 100 in length. This wasn't merely a problem of perspective, their dimensions seemed to shift, bending the light around them in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Spectral analysis provided little insight. The material of the ships absorbed most forms of radiation, reflecting only a fraction back to Earth. The little data scientists could gather suggested that the ships were composed of an advanced alloy or material completely unknown to humanity, something stronger than any metal yet as flexible as water. Perhaps most unnerving was their silence. The ships emitted no heat, no radio waves, no detectable energy signature. Their presence was more like a shadow than a solid object, a cosmic placeholder that existed in defiance of the laws of the universe. There were 5 ships in total, strategically positioned over major regions. One above North America, one over Europe, another above Asia, one over Africa, and the last above the Pacific Ocean. Their placement was deliberate but non-threatening, always in geostationary orbit, visible to the naked eye but far enough to avoid any immediate danger to Earth. Unlike satellites or space stations, they didn't rotate or move relative to the Earth. They simply hung in place, as if pinned to the fabric of space itself. Occasionally, faint lights would pulse along their surfaces, moving in slow, deliberate patterns that suggested intelligence or communication. For the people of Earth, the ships became a source of both terror and wonder. In cities, crowds gathered in parks, on rooftops, and in open spaces, staring upward with a mix of awe and dread. News helicopters captured footage of the ships glowing faintly in the night sky, their presence a stark reminder of how small and vulnerable humanity truly was. Religious leaders were quick to interpret the ships' meaning. Some called them vessels of divine origin, angels descending to guide humanity. Others denounced them as harbingers of the apocalypse, citing scripture and prophecy as evidence. Meanwhile, in scientific communities, the reaction was one of frenzied curiosity. The sheer impossibility of the ship's existence posed questions that had no answers. Astrophysicists debated whether the ships were manipulating gravity, bending space-time, or utilizing some other unknown force. Engineers speculated about the materials and propulsion systems involved, though every theory seemed inadequate. But not everyone responded with fascination. In military bases worldwide, generals and admirals stared grimly at monitors, their faces hard with suspicion. The ship's passive behavior didn't fool them, it was the calm before the storm, they insisted. Quietly, nations scrambled to mobilize their forces. In the United States, the Department of Defense ordered satellites to monitor the ships around the clock. Fighter jets were dispatched to the edges of Earth's atmosphere, though none dared approach. "Don't poke the bear," one Air Force commander muttered during a tense briefing. In Russia and China, similar precautions were taken, with leaders issuing public statements urging calm while privately preparing for the worst. The specter of colonialism haunted their discussions. If the Harbingers were as advanced as they appeared, humanity would be hopelessly outmatched in any confrontation. Social media exploded with theories about the ships. Some users shared memes, joking that the Harbingers had come to laugh at humanity's political squabbles or to fix climate change themselves. Others took a darker tone, warning that the ships were here to enslave or destroy humanity. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed the ships were a hoax, part of an elaborate government plot to unite the world under a single authoritarian regime. Others insisted the Harbingers had been living on Earth for decades, secretly guiding humanity's technological progress. In a small but vocal corner of the internet, the anti-contact movement emerged. Its members demanded the immediate destruction of the ships, arguing that any species advanced enough to travel between stars posed an existential threat to humanity. For many, the ship's presence was more than unsettling, it was existentially destabilizing. Overnight, the world seemed both smaller and infinitely larger. The ships weren't just a reminder of humanity's place in the universe, they were a challenge to everything people believed about their own significance. Some sought comfort in community, gathering in churches, mosques, and synagogues to pray. Others turned inward, questioning their purpose and grappling with an overwhelming sense of insignificance. Elena, like many scientists, was both terrified and exhilarated. She couldn't take her eyes off the live feeds of the ships, replaying them over and over as she tried to decipher their purpose. As the days passed, the ships became a symbol of something greater. To some, they represented hope, a promise that humanity was not alone and that perhaps a brighter future was within reach. To others, they were a warning, a reminder that power and technology could be as much a threat as a gift. And to Elena, they were a puzzle she couldn't ignore. The ship's stillness, their silence, their impossible design, it all spoke of a technology and understanding so far beyond humanity's grasp that it bordered on divine. "They're watching us," she whispered to herself one night, staring out at the glowing ship over North America. But what are they waiting for? 3 days after the Harbingers' global broadcast, as humanity reeled from their arrival and struggled to interpret their message, another unprecedented event unfolded. The United Nations Security Council had convened an emergency session, with representatives from every major nation attending in person or virtually. It was a rare moment of global cooperation, driven not by choice but by necessity. The Harbingers' silence since the broadcast had left humanity suspended in a state of uncertainty, and the world's leaders were desperate for answers. The session was interrupted by a sudden surge of activity. A previously inactive satellite, the property of no known government or corporation, began transmitting a signal. At first, it was dismissed as interference, but within moments, the signal revealed itself to be a message. The message wasn't a traditional transmission of text, audio, or video. Instead, it manifested as a burst of encoded data that appeared simultaneously on screens across the UN Assembly chamber. Technicians scrambled to decrypt it, but before they could finish, the meaning became clear. On every monitor, a single, unified symbol emerged, a glowing circle surrounded by delicate arcs that seemed to pulse in a rhythm. Alongside it, words appeared, translated automatically into every language known to humanity. "We seek a meeting. Representatives of Earth, come to us." The room erupted into chaos. Politicians shouted over one another, their voices a cacophony of fear and confusion. Some demanded more time to analyze the message, insisting it could be a trap. Others argued this was the chance they had been waiting for, a direct invitation to engage with the Harbingers. The symbol on the screen shifted, its pulsing growing slower, almost soothing. The room quieted as everyone present felt an inexplicable wave of calm wash over them. Though the sensation wasn't as overwhelming as the global broadcast, it was enough to restore order. The symbol brightened again, and a final message appeared. "We will await your answer. The time is short." News of the Harbingers' meeting request spread like wildfire. Across the world, reactions varied widely. Heads of state held emergency meetings to discuss their response. Should they comply with the request? If so, who would represent humanity? Would it be a group of scientists, politicians, military officials, or a combination of all three? Religious leaders were divided. Some viewed the invitation as a divine summons, while others warned against trusting beings whose motives were unknowable. Across social media was an explosion of debates, conspiracies, and memes. Protesters gathered in city centers, demanding transparency from their governments. No secret deals, became a rallying cry. Despite the widespread fear and skepticism, a consensus began to form. Humanity couldn't ignore the invitation. The United Nations established a committee to select the representatives who would meet with the Harbingers. After hours of debate, they agreed on a diverse team that reflected the planet's many cultures and disciplines. The team included Dr. Elena Vasquez, an astrophysicist and AI specialist, chosen for her expertise in interstellar phenomena and her advocacy for peaceful exploration. General Marcus Steele, a high-ranking military official from the United States, selected to ensure humanity's security interests were represented. Ambassador Amina Osei, a seasoned diplomat from Ghana, renowned for her work in conflict resolution and international cooperation. Dr. Arjun Patel, a biologist and ecologist from India, chosen for his knowledge of planetary systems and sustainability. Father Michael Darcy, a Catholic priest and theologian, included to address the spiritual and philosophical implications of the encounter. The team's selection was met with mixed reactions. Some praised the diversity of backgrounds, while others criticized the inclusion of a military figure and a religious leader. Still, it was widely agreed that this group was humanity's best chance at understanding the Harbingers. The Harbingers' request included specific coordinates, a location in low Earth orbit. The UN, with assistance from NASA, ESA, and other space agencies, prepared a spacecraft to carry the chosen representatives to the meeting point. The launch itself became a global event, broadcast live to billions. Crowds gathered in cities around the world, watching as the ship lifted off into the sky. It was a moment of shared anticipation, a rare unity in a fractured world. As the spacecraft approached the designated coordinates, the Harbinger's closest ship began to glow faintly, its iridescent surface rippling like water. A beam of light extended from its underside, enveloping the human vessel. The ship's crew reported no turbulence or resistance, just a sensation of weightlessness and calm as they were drawn inside. The human representatives were guided into the ship's interior by what appeared to be autonomous drones, floating spheres of light that emitted soft, melodic tones. The ship's corridors were vast and alien, with walls that pulsed faintly as if alive. At the heart of the ship, they were brought into a chamber unlike anything they had ever seen. The space seemed to defy traditional geometry, with surfaces that shimmered and shifted, creating the illusion of infinite depth. In the center of the chamber stood three beings, the Harbingers. The Harbingers were humanoid, but their features were ethereal, almost luminous. Their skin glowed faintly, a mix of silver and gold, and their eyes held a depth that seemed to peer into the soul. They wore no visible clothing, yet their forms radiated an elegance that transcended human aesthetics. When they spoke, their voices weren't heard with the ears but felt within the mind. "Welcome," they said in unison, their tone both warm and commanding. "We are here to guide, not to rule. Tell us, are you ready to listen?" The chamber fell silent as the Harbingers materialized, their arrival as sudden as it was inexplicable. One moment, the chamber's center was empty. The next, three figures stood there, their ethereal beauty commanding the room. The Harbingers were nothing short of stunning. Each of them was an impossibly tall woman, their statuesque forms exuding a grace that seemed to defy human proportions. Their skin glowed with a pale luminescence, smooth and flawless, radiating a soft, silvery light. Their faces were perfect, symmetrical, serene, and impossibly beautiful, with features so finely chiseled that they appeared sculpted by an artist's hand. Their hair was a striking silver, long and flowing like molten metal, catching the light in ways that seemed almost unreal. It cascaded down their backs in shimmering waves, flowing with an otherworldly fluidity. Their eyes, large and luminous, glowed with the same otherworldly light, their irises shifting through shades of deep blue and violet, reflecting an ancient wisdom that seemed both distant and immediate. The human representatives couldn't help but stare. Even General Steele, hardened by years of military service, found himself momentarily speechless. Elena Vasquez's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she felt as though she were in the presence of something divine, something far beyond human comprehension. Their beauty was almost overwhelming, both in its perfection and in the silent power it radiated. Are we seeing this? Dr. Patel whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the figures standing before them. Father Darcy, usually so composed, looked as if he were standing before angels. For a moment, the world seemed to slow, and the reality of what was happening, what they were seeing, felt like a dream. There was no movement from the Harbingers, but it was as if the air around them vibrated with an unseen force. The room, with its walls of stark metal and cold technology, felt warmer in their presence, as though the space itself was attuned to the beings who stood before them. Their clothing, or lack thereof, only heightened their otherworldly aura. They wore no fabric, no armor, yet somehow their forms remained dignified, modest even. The soft glow of their skin and the gentle, fluid motion of their hair were the only adornments they needed. It was a presence that transcended materiality. As the human representatives tried to absorb what they were witnessing, the Harbingers did not speak, at least, not in any language they could hear. Instead, the words came directly into their minds, as clear and sharp as if they had always been there. The voice was feminine, resonant with a power that vibrated through the very consciousness. "We are the Harbingers," the voice said, its tone both calming and commanding. "We are your kin, the echoes of your future. We have come because you have begun to awaken, and it is time for you to understand what lies ahead." The voice carried not only meaning, but emotion, sympathy, caution, and an undercurrent of something deeper, something older than humanity itself. The beauty of the Harbingers was more than just physical, it was the way they carried themselves, the way their mere presence seemed to bend reality itself. There was no aggression in him, no threat, yet they stood as if they held dominion over the space they inhabited. Each gesture, even a slight movement of their hands or the fluttering of their hair, seemed imbued with purpose. Elena's heart raced. She had studied astrophysics and advanced AI for years, but nothing in her academic life could have prepared her for the tangible weight of this encounter. The reality that stood before her seemed to defy every law of nature she knew. Father Darcy, struggling with his own sense of awe, finally spoke, his voice shaky but clear. "Are you gods?" The Harbinger who stood at the forefront of the trio turned her gaze toward him. The beauty in her eyes deepened, a faint hint of sorrow in the glowing pupils. "No," she said softly, her mental voice soothing yet impossibly clear. "We are not gods. We are you, just evolved. We are what you might become, should you choose the right path." The second Harbinger, whose silver hair was slightly darker than the others, stepped forward, her presence equally commanding but suffused with an air of grace that made it impossible to look away. She raised her hand, and the air around them seemed to hum as if they had activated some kind of energy field. With her motion, the first Harbinger began speaking again, the voice flowing into the minds of the humans. "You stand on the cusp of a great awakening. Your minds are expanding, your creations are advancing. You have unlocked the power of artificial intelligence and begun to reach out beyond your world. But with such power comes great risk," the Harbinger explained, her tone gentle but laced with a warning. "You are capable of greatness, but also of destruction." Her eyes, glowing with a soft purple light, seemed to hold all the centuries of wisdom that had come before. It was as if she could see not only their present selves, but the full arc of their potential future. For the representatives, the flood of emotions, thoughts, and questions was almost too much to process. Elena was overwhelmed with awe, both terrified and exhilarated by what she had just heard. Her scientific curiosity burned bright. How could it be possible that these beings, these Harbingers, were actually human, just evolved over millennia? What did that mean for the future of humanity? Father Darcy, still holding on to his faith, spoke next. "Why us?" he asked, his voice reverberating with both reverence and suspicion. "Why have you chosen to reveal yourselves now?" The first Harbinger's eyes softened. "Because you are at a crossroads. Your species has begun to touch the edges of a new era, one fraught with both peril and promise. We have watched over your kind, unseen, until now. You are not yet ready to meet us, but we will help guide you, if you will allow it." The presence of the Harbingers felt like a dream, yet the weight of their words settled on the representatives like a stone. These beings were undeniably beautiful, perfect in every way, but the questions they brought with them were even more important. What did this sudden encounter mean for humanity? Were the Harbingers truly here to help, or was there an agenda, an ultimatum, that they weren't yet revealing? The uncertainty lingered in the air, thick with the knowledge that these beings, so impossibly perfect, held the key to a future that might be humanity's salvation, or its doom.